morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where Tim Miller is making it very clear he's not going away. Yes, as Ryan Reynolds and Fox work to make positive headlines for Deadpool 2 with their search for a replacement for Tim Miller is fighting back in the industry trades to prove that he is going to continue to work. And I think that it's a little bit scary for Deadpool 2 and Fox, because if Tim Miller is successful and Deadpool 2 isn't as successful as Ryan Reynolds and Fox would hope, Miller's success will haunt that film. And so far he's off to a pretty good start. No directing announcements. As some of you have pointed out, he's supposed to be working on that other project for Fox, but it's not getting a lot of traction. Potentially because Fox doesn't want to play up the opportunity that Miller is taking now that he's not working on Deadpool 2, right? I mean, that would be a little bit of a negative for Deadpool 2, and they, of course, want to protect that. So Miller is making his own headlines over at Sony, where he's going to executive produce the Sonic the Hedgehog movie, which is a pretty darn big property. Now, again, he's executive producing. He will not be directing, but he's doing it through his animation studio, Blur Studios. And animation, of course, is a pretty lucrative space right now, and Tim Miller looks like he's going to be getting into it in a big way, because he's also working to produce with David Fincher an animated adaptation of the popular comic The Goon. So with this project, though, this is going to be a live-action animation hybrid, and Josh Miller is one of the people working on the script, and he's worked with Tim Miller before, where Miller produced his animated short, Go for Broke, get it, about farm animals, and that was actually nominated for Best Animated Short back in 2005. So getting an Oscar-nominated name on there that you can put in the trailer is certainly very exciting. And I think that Tim Miller, when you put his name on there, it's going to make people feel that the Sonic the Hedgehog action sequences, which of course are integral to the success of such a film, are going to be pretty darn good. And Blur Studios has been in demand a lot as of late for not only some animation work, but also to do some opening credits work as well. So that's very exciting for Miller, that he's not only getting his name out there and, establishing himself almost as a brand. Like Tim Miller, like to some degree David Fincher, right? George Miller. And interestingly, I think George Miller, come to think of it, is a great comparison, because George Miller, another Miller, makes some really exciting live action films like Mad Max Fury Road, but he's also the guy behind the Happy Feet movies and Babe. So, Tim Miller might be looking to follow in his footsteps. Although, hopefully, his successes are closer together than Miller's. The other Miller, George Miller, who has to wait quite a long time between successes. And he looks to be currently experiencing another dry spell. We'll see. But look for Tim Miller to have a directing announcement pretty soon, because I think this is very aggressive to sign deals so quickly. I think if he was going to play ball, he would just work on this other project for Fox and just hang back a little bit while Deadpool 2 gets all its ducks in a row. But the fact that he's having competing headlines with his former project, not a good sign. But, good for Miller. I think that he should have stayed on Deadpool 2 to get kicked off. Pretty much of the project that he helped to make a big deal is kind of crumbing, and so I think he's going to want to not only fight back, but prove that he's not going to be down for the count. He has to look out for his own career as well here. But again, as I said, I think that Tim Miller's probable success could really haunt Ryan Reynolds, Fox, and Deadpool 2. So that's the first story of the day. Now, the second story of the day is that Disney announced yesterday they're going to do a live-action Snow White. I just talked about this the other day with my Mulan coverage, saying, oh, they lost out on Snow White with Mirror, Mirror, and Snow White and the Huntsman, and so that's I said scorched earth for a while. But Disney sees life, or actually, I don't know why they're making they're greenlighting way too many live-action fairy tales. Like when I first heard this news, I was like, why not, right? I mean, they're making so much money off of them. I can understand where Disney's coming from, but I think if they're not careful, they're going to get to the point where we all have that reaction to the announcements. Like, okay, you're making it at some point in time, right? Like, unless you give me a release date, like Mulan, I'm just not going to believe it. And also, let's just focus on Mulan, right? I mean, why don't you make some announcements about that instead of, oh, we're working on yet another live-action fairy tale. But this one gives me some cause for concern, and which makes me pause. So the talent attached to this is just absolutely dreadful. Well, at least the screenwriter. So they're like, you know who we should get to write this? Aaron Cressida Wilson, who wrote The Girl on the Train. And boy, in my review of that movie, I was like, you know whose fault this is? Erin Cressida Wilson. And it's not even a surprise considering the movie she's written in the past. I mean, I don't know who would look at her resume and go, this is the person, hire her, especially with The Girl on the Train as her latest project. The film, not well received. Everybody's saying the book is better. And it's not even a financial hit. So it's not a critical hit, but you can't even point and say, well, at least it's making money. Oh, and critics are snobs and they don't understand Erin Cressida Wilson's brilliance. No one understands Erin Cressida Wilson's supposed brilliance. So I don't know why on earth anybody would hire her to do anything, particularly something that needs to be successful for the studio. Then here's the crazy thing. They're creating new songs. You know, I guess Beauty and the Beast live action is testing well, but they're really taking the live action fairy tales strongly into the musical route, which I think is really tricky because Into the Woods is the one Disney live action fairy tale as of late that didn't do as well as the rest of them. So I'd be like, why do you need them to sing? I don't know, okay? And they're not even doing like the classic songs. They're gonna, well, maybe they'll include some of them, but they're gonna do new songs. And you know what? It's hard to write new songs. That's one of the reasons that Disney has been so legendary over the years, because they have had very good writing teams. But even as of late, they haven't. Frozen was an anomaly, and that was also even I think that the Lopez's haven't been able to duplicate that success even. So it was an anomaly even for the Lopez's. It's very hard to write great music. That's why people still look back to Rodgers and Hammerstein and Lerner and Lowe and all these teams that no one has been able to duplicate yet. I think the closest people have come is comedic stuff. And even with Lin-Manuel Miranda and Hamilton, I think that Hamilton, I'm starting to suspect, might be successful because of the race bending it did and what it represented for bringing diversity to Broadway. And I think it has that one great song, I'm not going to lose my shot or waste my shot. But I have to say, You're Welcome, the song that he wrote for Moana for Dwayne Johnson, they released a clip of that last week, and it was not particularly well received. And also they had another song from Moana, How Far I'll Go, which was also not particularly well received. Both are pleasant enough, but maybe we have to see them in context, like Let It Go from Frozen. But right now, I'm not seeing a huge hit here musically. So I would be very careful, especially when you have these Disney classics that are known for amazing music. You would hate for people to be like, yeah, the new music is lacking in comparison to the old music. It's very scary. I think the last great songwriting duo was Howard Ashman, obviously, and Alan Menken. I just watched Little Shop of Horrors last night for Halloween. So good, so amazing. And you can actually hear the influence, though, on what Howard Ashman and Alan Menken did later for Disney. Everybody has a style. It's interesting to see. But anyway, the music for the Snow White movie will be from the La La Land team of Benj Pasek and Justin Paul. Now, we haven't heard the La La Land music yet. We've heard it in the trailer. It doesn't seem particularly catchy. I don't think anyone's been like, wow, the music in La La Land is amazing. I think it's the visuals that make it work so far. I haven't heard anybody saying I'm going around singing that all day long. Maybe we'll be pleasantly surprised when the movie comes out. They have a Broadway musical coming out called Dear Evan Hansen. Maybe that'll be a big hit. And they're also doing original songs for the Hugh Jackman, Zac Efron circus movie, The Greatest Showman on Earth, which is coming up as well. But I think that this is really tricky, and I think that it's hard enough to reimagine these live-action fairy tales in a more adult manner, which is what really, I think, and a more sophisticated manner, which is what's really working for Disney. And I think when you add the extra checkbox of great music, it might be an insurmountable goal. All right, so I'm curious to what do you think, and what do you think? Do you think Disney's live-action department is out of control? Fairy tale department. All right, so because I'm covering the Rick Famuyiwa story in its own video, I decided to do 2 viewer questions today. So the first is from Jeannie Panini. That's a great name, Jeannie Panini. I wonder if that's your real name. That is awesome. And if not, great name you gave yourself. So Jeannie Panini says, hey Grace, I don't know if you'll see this. I did, but I have a question and sadly no Twitter account. That's fine. You don't have to. Actually, I largely take questions from the comments on the videos, just sometimes from Twitter. So Jeannie continues saying, regarding your coverage of the anime story, yesterday I talked about Your Name from Japan. Jeannie says, what characteristics would you say make up Western audience sensibilities? And how can Eastern creators make their work geared towards this ideal? Should they have to? Aren't their markets sufficient? If you catch this, thanks for reading. My pleasure, Jeannie. Thanks for the great question. And so let me explain. So just for those of you, just to recap yesterday's discussion, I said that Your Name was very Eastern in sensibilities, and I wondered if it would play to a broad Western audience. As many of you pointed out, there are certainly a lot of anime fans in the West, but anime movies don't do particularly well at the American box office. That's to some degree because they don't have particularly good ad campaigns and distribution, but still they don't do as well as Western animated movies. Western sensibilities, the way we do story structure, for instance, the three-act structure that we have in our stories. For instance, Bollywood also will mix many genres. That's a different kind of style of filmmaking, whereas in the United States, in the West, we're not that big on mixing genres. So that's another Western sensibility. And also just, stuff that you see in society. For instance, I think that the male-female body switching, I think that for a lot of Western audiences, that's a little bit of a stretch to get them, especially if you want something to be, I think animation is largely regarded as a family film, and I just honestly think that a lot of people would be like, that seems like an older kind of a movie. But interestingly enough, in the East, a lot of older audiences do go to see animation without kids, where I think that's something that we haven't quite gotten to here in the West, which I would like to see happen. I want my Legend of Korra or any Airbender animated movie with great action sequences, but we just haven't gotten there. I don't know if we ever will, but we certainly haven't gotten there yet. So Eastern creators, I think, you just have to kind of look at the way, what appeals to Western audiences, how Westerners think in their culture, that kind of a thing. Now, why should they have to? That question. That's a great question. And, there's so much money to be made in the Eastern markets, particularly the amazing trinity of Asia, the box office trinity of China, Japan, and South Korea, that you don't need to make a movie that appeals to the West. You can make a ton of money right there in that region. Look at, not only is Your Name has made $160 million in Japan, but The Mermaid, last I checked, it might have changed recently, but it's one of the highest grossing movies of the year globally, just from its Chinese box office of like over $500 million. So the money's there. They don't have to go to the West. Just like Deadpool didn't have to go to China to make a ton of money. But here's the thing. If you want to make a lot of money, you need to be able to go to both markets. And the big markets, again, are the United States and China. So you need something that plays in both markets to really make that huge amount of... If you want your movie to make as much money as it possibly can, that's what you want to do. Also, there's a lot of opportunity when you go into Hollywood. Hollywood is a big place. And some filmmakers don't want to make the jump. They're perfectly content working in their own markets, they can have great success there. But if you want to be one of the greatest filmmakers of all time that everybody knows about, globally, you got to take a trip through Hollywood, right? So, why does everybody know who Miyazaki is? Well, I think partially because, Disney has done such a good job getting his name out there, distributing his films in the West. So that's and he's still, even then, I think only really strong animation fans know who Miyazaki is. I think that at some point, Eastern filmmakers, especially, they've shown a desire to do this. They want to be household names in the West. They want to be global household names. And so that's why they do it. Again, you don't have to do it, but if you really want to be at the top of your field, you do have to do it. All right, so Jeannie Panini, thank you for a great question. And also, if you're in different parts, if you're in other countries, like for instance, The Raid had to play everywhere to become the sensation that it was. But it still led to no work for really anybody involved, which is very sad. But anyway, so that had I think strong Western appeal. But it was squashed because Hollywood wanted to make a remake of it, and that's kind of sad. But anyway, it's a complicated situation. But I hope that at least got you a little bit of situated into what's going on there, Jeannie. Great question. All right, so the second question of the day is from Isaac Leon. And this is another great question. You guys are on fire today. So he says, hello, Grace, question. And then he did little siren emojis, which I think is fantastic. I think those are sirens. But anyway, Isaac said, I'm a long-time viewer. Thank you. And I always start my morning routine watching your videos. That means so much. And good morning. So now that we're starting to have conversations about awards season and whitewashing, I want to know your opinion about the last 3 years where Mexican directors won a lot of major awards. Yet still we have the Oscars so white conversation, and nobody talks about these amazing Latino directors. I hope you can take a moment to discuss this. Much love from Mexico. Have an amazing week, and a bunch of cute emojis. Greetings to Mexico. So I can see why you're very proud of Alejandro Inarritu and Alfonso Cuarón's wins. But also I'd like to add Ang Lee to the discussion, who won the year before them. He hails from Taiwan, although he he's worked and studied most of his life in the United States. But Ang Lee won for Life of Pi. Then it was Alfonso Cuarón for Gravity, and then Inarritu won 2 years in a row. First with Birdman and then The Revenant. I think he deserved it for Birdman, not for The Revenant, but he told a lot of sob stories on the awards campaign trail, and so he was like, it was so cold and horrible, and nobody was like, why did you shoot that way? But anyway, he won. So as you can see, for the last 4 years, you've had non-white directors take home the win. So why Oscars so white still? Well, I think, first of all, you know, and it's a complicated conversation, particularly for a white person to have. But from what I can see, you know, I think that to some degree Latino talent, especially talent like Alejandro Inarritu and Alfonso Cuarón, isn't really considered, they're really considered people of color. They seem very well integrated into, you know, the Hollywood community, and also the films that they're making aren't representative of their, it's not like any of these people made films about, you know, their home countries, right? And also, Birdman and The Revenant starred white actors. So did Gravity. And Life of Pi, that of course was a story about India. So I think that's another reason that you don't see that. I think that people want to see talent that's pushing their communities and, you know, those kind of stories. So I think that's another reason. I think if Alejandro Inarritu and Alfonso Cuarón had made movies that were indicative of Mexico and Mexican culture, maybe they would be getting recognition. But I think it's a difficult place for Latino talent to be, right? You know, it's like not, you know, it's that limbo, that gray zone, which is so difficult to navigate. It's like, okay, well, you're not white enough to be considered like white talent, but you're not, you know, you're not of color enough to be considered, you know, not non-white talent, right? Although they don't seem to be suffering, they're winning Oscars. But I think that that's why you're still having the Oscars so white conversation. Now, I think that Alfonso Cuarón's son recently made a movie, Desierto, about you know, the problems with the border, but he made it like a genre film that was also a horror movie, and, you know, and so it kind of disappeared. Maybe if he'd made a little bit more of a serious film, it would have gotten some recognition. But I think that that's the direction that these directors will have to move into if they want that to happen. I also think the same thing's happening with Asian talent. You know, just Isaac, to clarify the situation, it's not just a bias against Latino directors. I don't think that Asian directors are getting a lot of shout outs either for what they're accomplishing, right? We always discuss John Chu, Justin Lin, James Wan. They're not making, you know, quote unquote Asian movies. So I think that's a success that maybe will be seen later on down the line and will be recognized. But right now, it's always the idea of, like, are you pulling people with you, but why should you? You know, it's also the same thing for women directors. Should women only make films about other women? I would love to see women directors have the kind of success that these Latino and Asian directors male directors are having, right? So it's a complicated situation, but I think that, and also it's a behind the camera situation as well, and people really want to see this stuff the change in the actual movies themselves. So it's a complex thing, and we'll see what happens this year, but I'm glad that you brought it up, Isaac, and I think you should keep bringing it up and just keep pointing out and saying, you know, there is a lot of progress being made behind the camera, and we should be very proud of that. So congratulations to those directors for their wins, and I think that for the most part, I actually don't like Gravity or The Revenant, but I think that they were well directed. So, well, actually, I don't think The Revenant was particularly well directed, but I think I can understand why everybody won. So anyway, thank you for your question, Isaac. Thank you, Jeannie, as well. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts down below about not only the first two stories, but Jeannie and Isaac's questions. I think they're very complicated, so it's a great discussion to start. And you can check out some more videos right now.